Welcome back, everybody, to the School Leadership Show. This is Mike Dowdy. With me, as always, intrepid co-host Jenn. Have I used intrepid before? I think I have.
I'm not sure. But
So
I don't know
we
about so intrepid right now. Definitely warm in the 60s here in New York City and Brooklyn.
It is pretty nice. So we
Yeah.
have a very cool guest with us today, Chris Joffe. And Chris has a really cool background. We're going to talk about his book, All Clear, which is about school safety. And Chris, I don't you I'm sure don't know this, but we have a little something in common. You were a paramedic. Are you still certified as a paramedic?
I'm not certified. I let it all go a few
You let it
years
go.
ago because I work in the office and with schools now. But yeah, that's how I got started.
That's funny because I became an EMT when I was 18 years old and was certified for like 25 years. And then eventually I just had to let it go. So, but it is nice. I was talking to one of my, I don't know about you, but I end up just dumb luck stopping at probably one accident a quarter. Like
Oh
I
my,
just end up, I don't know, I have this weird luck. So I ended, and I went the
If that's
last
what you
one.
want to call it, luck.
Well, no,
that's a lot.
it's bad. So I got to tell you,
He's
so the
on the
last,
road a lot. Yeah.
I log a lot of miles, but the last one I went to, nobody had any medical training. It was crazy. And then afterwards, I was talking to my buddy who's a captain in a fire district, and I'm like, man, maybe I should go back and get recertified. And he looked at me, he goes, well, what would you have done differently if you were certified? I'm like, nothing, I guess. Don't bother. So anyway, that's all we're here for. Chris, we're here to talk about your book and how you got in from this emergency medicine world into school safety and managing crises in school. Because I'm here to tell you some of my best training as a school administrator came from my EMS days. So I am so excited to hear all of these connections and how you got there and why this book. Go. And by the way, where's this podcast find you right now?
Yeah, I'm home in Los Angeles. I also am on the road way too much. Not, I don't see the volume of incidents that you do, which I now consider myself lucky for. But no, I'm home in Los Angeles and feeling really happy about that. I started the company and really my career very similarly, or at least kind of as I heard you say that it feels very similar to you in that I would show up to emergency calls and I would, somebody would have called 911, right? I'd show up, hey, what's going on? Why are you there? Why are we here? How did all of this happen? And one of the things that would happen routinely is nobody would have started to help the person that was hurt. And over again, I was frustrated and I thought, why are people not doing anything? And I started asking people. And I was really careful, just for anybody listening, it was trauma informed, right? I didn't come out and say, like, how dare you not help? I said, can you help me understand what's happened since you made the call and we arrived, right? Those sorts of things. And what I generally heard from people was three things. Either they didn't know what to do, they were afraid that helping might make the person worse, or they were afraid they were going to get sued. And I started my career in Southern California, right? We tend to be a fairly litigious community here in the US, et cetera, right? The more litigious in the world. And so I started this company with the idea that I would just start training people. And I wanted to train people well enough that they knew what to do, well enough that they knew they wouldn't make it worse. And ideally, I wanted people to also have the confidence that they could say, I also can defend myself if it comes to that. And lo and behold, those three pillars became a training foundation for the schools that we started to work with. It turned out that schools were a really cool client group for me because they were big classes, they always paid their bill, and they actually really enjoyed their sort of training, right? They would come back year after year after year and say, hey, we put this into action. I saved my kid. I did the Heimlich maneuver, the abdominal thrusts to relieve somebody from choking. Speaking of litigious. Anyway, so this became the center of my work was working with schools. And then over the course of a few years, they started to ask for more. Can you do our fire drills with us? Can you do our earthquake drills with us? Can you do our lockdown drills with us? And slowly but surely, we started to kind of expand our zone of expertise. We started to hire people that had expertise in these new areas. We started to work with more and more schools. Again, we started in LA. All of a sudden, we're working with schools in San Francisco and Chicago. they have these things called tornadoes in other parts of the country, which I had not really had close exposure to, and hurricanes in Florida. And so all of a sudden, this organization was born. And today it's about 700 people. We serve schools in about 34 states plus DC, and we have about 2,000 schools, give or take, that we support. So that's at least the company. And as far as the book, I was bored during COVID, like everybody else that I talked to, and I spent a little bit of time watching Tiger King and learning how to make sourdough. I didn't learn how to make sourdough, but I watched other people learn how to make sourdough, and at some point I thought I need to start documenting the ideas that are running around in my head. And I took advantage of the time. I wrote a whole book. I sent it to the publisher because I wrote the book before I had a publisher. The publisher said, "This is absolute garbage," and asked me to reject, like completely rejected the book. And then it was no longer COVID, right? Like it was no longer lockdown, and I had to write a book because now I had a signed contract with a publisher. So I rewrote the book in a lot less time with a lot less like freedom, and then they published it. So here we are.
And I want to
Nice.
say that that's funny because so the publisher is Josie Bass, and I summarize a lot of their books. So they sent me the book, and I was like, why am I going to do a book about emergency preparedness? Don't people just follow, what the district says? And
Yes.
but I don't know why I was compelled to read it. They sent it to me. They chopped down some trees to do so. So I was just really impressed that your approach was not, here are the steps you just got to follow, all of the steps that are in the handbook, but a real human response. Like emergencies don't happen to two-dimensional characters like, the Roadrunner being squashed by an anvil, right? I mean, these are real people and real schools who we care deeply about. And you took a real human approach, and you even told me when I met you before that really the key to doing emergency preparedness well is two things: leadership and communication. And that's what I got from the book, and I was like, that's what we want our leaders to develop anyway. So yeah, it's an unusual book. Mike and I don't usually talk about this kind of book. I don't usually summarize it. So yeah, no, that's amazing. Well, let's jump right in. So first of all, like, what kinds of emergencies are you talking about? Let's start with the
Yes,
basics.
just level set here. Yeah, so I mean, I believe that emergencies are self-defined by the leader. So if you're a brand new principal and you are showing up on campus your first time sitting in the principal seat and lunch gets delivered late, that is an emergency for you, right? Like that is full stop. That is a big emergency. It is not a 911 emergency, although I have known people to call 911 for that emergency, but it is an emergency. So like I truly start there, and then I go to obviously things that are much more severe, much higher impact, and honestly that leave a lasting effect on communities. And so everything from major fires to weapons on campus, to threat assessment, to fights on campus, to active shooters, which of course is sort of a thematic conversation we've had much more of over the last few years. But part of the way I think about emergencies is they become a part of our organization's history. I've been doing a ton of work for the wildfires here in Southern California, not for the wildfires, for the schools that they affected. And in the process of doing all of that work, I keep talking to people about the idea that now, 30 years from now, 50 years from now, 100 years from now, the resilience that we built today, the recovery that we're leading today, will be referenced as a part of our organization's history. And it will actually affect the culture and the dynamic, the leadership selection. It will affect everything about our organization in the future. And so I believe that most emergencies, if not even those late for lunch emergencies, can affect the organization long term. And those are the ones that we tend to have the biggest impact with.
And they always say, right, never let a good crisis go to waste. So yeah, things are going to happen. And if you can demonstrate leadership and as positive an outcome as possible, right, that works for the leader. So talk about when you do this kind of work. Jenn mentioned taking it from kind of a human perspective and thinking about relationships. When you do this work with schools, like how do you start? Like, what's
Yes.
your approach?
Yeah, it's a great question, and I'll say probably the most important thing is to start where the school is, start where their leader is, and start where their school is. I find a lot of times schools will call us, and often this is after a major emergency happens somewhere in the country, right? So a school will call us and will say, there was just a shooting in blank city, 4 hours away from us. Our parents have come to us and said, what are you doing to prepare your school, to prepare our school to be safe in the event of the same thing happening here? And often that leader says, the truth is, I haven't done enough. I haven't done anything this year, right? The reality is all schools have done something to make themselves safer. 100% of schools have done something. Have they done enough? I don't know that, right? That really depends on the school, the culture, the climate, where they are, all that sort of stuff. But they've done something. And so start with what you've done so far. Start with where you are right now. And then what I talk to schools about is this sort of Swiss cheese approach. You'll hear it called the layered approach. And again, for those that, well, you're not seeing us here, but if you imagine a block of Swiss cheese, right, and just slice a few layers of cheese, like you're gonna make a sandwich. Now I'm hungry. Now hopefully lunch isn't late. Anyway, so if you kind of think about that and think about each intervention that you could put in place as a layer of Swiss cheese, it's porous, it's imperfect, but it's a layer. And if you were to say, let's put in security, that's one layer. And you say, okay, let's put in video monitoring, that's another layer. Let's put in incident command or the idea of crisis leadership, there's another layer. Well, you might end up with an entire block of cheese over the course of just a few minutes of reflection of what's already in place. Start there, and then start to think about how could I minimize the pores, the holes in those Swiss cheese layers? How could I make them a little bit stronger, a little bit safer, a little bit more robust? And then start to say, how can I add a few more layers in? And again, this is not a one size fits all. I'm not suggesting everybody just needs to add 3 more layers, but I am suggesting, generally speaking, adding another layer or shrinking the holes in the layers that we have. Those are the 2 directions that we have to go. And so that's really where our work begins, which is appropriate in each school. And again, starting from where we're standing right now, not from the fictitious place we wish we could be, or from an overly nervous place that is probably, or at least in some cases, maybe even hyperbolized a bit. That's a word.
So when you
Yeah.
think, go ahead. I'm sorry, Jen, go ahead.
Yeah, no. Well, first of all, I like the strengths-based approach. Mike and I often talk about that in other areas of schools. So to think about, right, to say that, look, everybody listening right now, you have done something already, right? So you help them identify, what it is they've done so that they can do a little bit of a gap analysis. So I love that. I was just going to ask Mike, unless your question comes next, but you talk early on in the book about the leader starting with themselves, which is always a great place to start, right? And really sort of examining their own responses to crises. So can you talk a little bit about that? And then Mike, you get in with your question.
Yeah. So, let's go to your last job interview. Maybe it was to get the role you're sitting in right now. You remember those feelings right before you went in? You were like, you had those like, butterflies in your belly, and you were thinking, I really want to get this. Maybe your hands got sweaty. Maybe your face got cold. Okay, I shouldn't admit this, but I was watching Love is Blind yesterday. I was watching it yesterday. Anyway, and like you could actually see on some of the cast members or the actors, I don't know what, reality TV people, you could see their skin actually sort of flush as they were asked questions and being interviewed. And I stopped and talked to my fiance about that's the stress reaction. And she was like, I don't care. We're trying to have fun and watch a fun show. And I was like, yeah, but that's in my book. Anyway, what I find is that people don't recognize that we all are going to have that stress reaction at the beginning of the emergency. Our skin's going to go flush. We're going to feel those butterflies. And what's amazing is that some people will have a sort of stress reaction into action, right? So we go, ooh, this is making me nervous. This is causing me to want to do something to protect myself. So I won't do this, but if you imagine a tennis ball being thrown at the camera right now, or for those that are listening, if you imagine a tennis ball being thrown at your face right now, right? Some of you would go to catch that ball and you would immediately take that action to protect yourself. Others would stand there and would have this moment of analysis paralysis. You would stress into almost like stoicism. Either case is a stress reaction, and frankly, different leaders respond differently to different emergencies. Different types of emergencies affect us differently. Let me be the first to tell you, if you throw a tennis ball at my face, you are going to hit my face. I am not going to catch that tennis ball. I don't know how to do it. On the flip side, if I'm in the middle of a school-based emergency, I'm going to take an initial action. And so where I think, I spend a lot of time is how do I influence those first few seconds of the emergency and really make sure that I, as a leader, know what I'm going to do, when that emergency begins, I'm going to take action. Or again, right, in the case of the tennis ball, I personally know I'm going to get hit in the face. And so, what are we going to do differently from the point where I notice it, I get hit in the face, and then I pick up from there? And I'm sort of managing those first seconds. And that's what I want all leaders to be able to do is say, like, what are those first few seconds going to look and feel like for me based on my level of engagement, awareness, responsiveness, stress response strategy, and then to be able to sort of build your plan around that.
And I love thinking that way because I'm sure you're probably a lot like I am, where when there's the emergency, your reaction is to run towards it. Like
Yes.
and that and for me, for people whose reaction isn't that, I don't get it. Like, what do you mean? What do you mean you're not running that way toward the stuff that's going wrong? And
Yes.
other people no. But so I think that's important because I think for a lot of leaders, we probably, I mean, and you tell me, but you've worked with a lot of school leaders, and I think for the most part, they're outgoing, and when there's a problem, they want to get in there and solve it, which makes it hard to empathize with the people whose initial reaction is not that.
Yes. Well, and school leaders are an interesting category of people because school leaders, they tend to be like you and I, Mike, where they'll run to the problem at times at their own
Peril.
sacrifice, peril. Yes. And you can find so often a school leader sprinting into the center of a fight or sprinting into a situation where a person is on campus that doesn't belong there. And all of a sudden, they're actually one of those people who's getting hurt or one of those people who's now a part of the emergency. And so we use the phrase, put your own mask on first. And like we have all of these isms that we encourage our school leaders to adopt. It is so, so hard to recognize and to actually remember in the emergency to listen to that training. And so I think one of the things again, right, some of the stress reaction is like recognize it's happening. Some of it is overcome denial, right? Say, oh, yes, this is happening. I sometimes encourage school leaders or anybody for that matter to say out loud what's happening because it's really different to hear yourself say, oh, I'm having chest pain. I'm noticing that chest pain is radiating throughout my left shoulder, right? All of a sudden now I'm starting to think, okay, I'm having a cardiac emergency, right? And for those who have comfort with cardiac emergencies, that sounds more familiar. Oh, I have a student who's really struggling in math. I have a second grader who is, forgive me here, not adding or multiplying or doing whatever second grade math level is appropriate, right? And so to verbalize that problem then starts to help your body recognize that it's real, it's happening, and then you can more intentionally take that action. So those are kind of a combination of thoughts around that initial first few seconds.
Well,
And
and
you talk
even
about one of the strategies is in the book, commit to immediate action. So rather than waiting for the emergency to rear its ugly head, right, that ahead of time, you would have a sense for yourself. Am I run into the fire? Am I more freeze? What kind of person am I? And, we can talk about the team develop. It may not be you as the principal or the assistant principal or, who runs toward the fire or the tornado. But what you're saying, think that through ahead of time. But the one strategy is commit to act. Act as
Yes.
if, what that loud noise wasn't just someone tripping, but a gunshot, right? Act as if those heavy winds were spreading a fire, and so commit to that immediate action.
yeah, it's
Absolutely.
almost the opposite, right? We usually tell people if you hear hoofbeats, think horses, not zebras. But in the case of an emergency, right, you want to be prepared. And I think thinking about it ahead of time and thinking about how you respond, like, because you know as well as I do, you get to an emergency and it's tunnel vision and you lose your situational awareness. There have been times, Jen, I've stopped at accidents and I have forgotten to put the car in park. I've gotten out of the car and the car is still moving because I'm so focused
Oh
on
no.
getting to the emergency. But also, I think something to be aware of, and I'm sure you've bumped into this when you get. Sometimes I'm the worst enemy to myself, right? Yeah, I have some medical training, but when I'm a school administrator, my job is not to administer first aid to hurt people. My job is to be incident commander potentially, right? So I think even knowing that, like sometimes you have to set aside some of the other skills that you might have and stay in your role.
Yes, that term you just used, incident commander, is it's the through line. It goes back to what Jen started with, right? All emergencies are going to require leadership. Somebody has to step up and say, I am in charge of this emergency, and I am going to be the one who takes responsibility for what does and does not happen next.
And
The
I like that you have an org chart. You suggest that leaders put together, all leaders will say, yeah, I've got an org chart, but no, no, no. And in case of emergency org chart. So can you tell us a little bit about some of the teams or roles that you think leaders should be sure to have in place before an emergency hits?
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, the first is that incident command role, right? As principal, you might think that's going to be me. I'm going to always step into that incident command role. Now, I'll say, and Mike's shaking his head. He's like, maybe not. And that's absolutely true. The more you are comfortable with other people on campus stepping into the leadership role, I would argue the better. And we'll unpack that a little bit in a second. But in concept, what I also want people to walk away with is I need you to have not just one incident commander, not just a backup, which is typically where schools stop. This is a critical position. You must have, excuse me, you must have this in any emergency. Therefore, you need at least 3 people who can step into that role, and ideally 5 to 7. And so if you're starting to think, wait a second, my whole admin team is 5 people, how could I possibly have them all equipped? And again, right, think your strongest member of your admin team, think your least strong member of your admin team, and you're thinking, ooh, am I going to have all 5 of them be my incident commander? The answer might be yes. So we really need to start there. Do I have enough people who I can say, yes, they will take lead, they will lead this emergency, and I can trust them to do so? And then do they know that? Because so often we put people's name on a list and then we forget to tell them, we forget to train them, and then all of a sudden the emergency happens and everybody's looking at them and they're looking back at everybody else going, why are you all looking at me? So, excuse me, I'm getting over a cold thing from travel and nonsense, but once you have your incident commander selected and you know, okay, it's going to be this person, then this person, then this person, and again, right, 5 to 7. Then the next step is to figure out what other, and I'm going to use the term strike teams, other teams you need to have in place to serve other responsibilities that may need to happen. So let me put this into perspective. You have the fire alarm go off on campus. We all have fire. Hopefully we don't all have fires. Hopefully we all have fire alarm systems though. We do our drills. We have the fire alarm go off. So we recognize that. We evacuate the buildings. Everybody's outside. What's the first thing we do? Hopefully it's take attendance, right? Where are all of the students? Did we actually effectively evacuate the entire building, or are there people left behind? And so the first step in most emergencies is going to be figure out who's accounted for. Well, then there's this really sort of challenging part, which we, by the way, introduced during a lot of drills, where we'll say, hey, you missed a kid, right? Or sometimes during drills, always prepared, again, trauma informed, right? You never want to surprise people with drills that are greater than the level of comfort that they are at. Or said differently, we want to continue to meet people where they are. And if you start surprising people mid-drill unexpectedly, you can actually do more damage than good. So again, proactively, we come out, we say, hey, everybody, we're going to pull a student out of line. We're going to pull a faculty member out of line. And then we'll do that. The attendance team goes, wait a second, we don't have everybody. We were not prepared for this. We did not expect this. We're missing someone. Now we need to have some other teams in place, like a search and rescue team, to go in and find the people who might be missing. Now, I just used a fire example, and hopefully everybody paid attention in the fire safety video at the beginning of the school year. You don't want to go back into a burning building, but earthquake, tornado, hurricane, these other circumstances where more than just our school might be affected, the fire department may not be back yet or may not be on campus yet. And so we may have to do some of that work by ourselves. And then the team that's probably least talked about, that is most important to me, by the way, there are others, but most important is reunification. All of our emergencies, every single emergency that we have at a school is going to end in returning the kids to the families that brought them to school. Every single one, 100%, late lunch to major earthquake that affects an entire region. We're going to give kids back at the end of the day. It's the basic commitment we make. And yet most of our schools haven't practiced that. And so if there's one thing you do coming out of this call, okay, if there's 3 things you do, hopefully establish leadership, hopefully you then sort of layer in communication, right? How are we going to do that? We'll talk about that in a minute. But then it's build a reunification strategy and execute it, because we have to have that team. We have to have comfort, confidence, and training for not just our staff, but also for our families, so that they know how to participate in the reunification process. And then in general, you want to have a crisis counseling team, a first aid team, a couple other teams. Maybe I'll share with you a full org chart we can put in the podcast notes, and that way people have access to it for themselves. They can fill in some of those gaps.
That'd be great. Yeah. And also just they can go back, read your book, look at my summary and to get more of an idea. So don't be overwhelmed by all these teams. Chris explains them really well. I did want to get to another strategy where you talk about strengthening relationships. And Mike and I have definitely had Doug Fisher, Nancy Fry, that all these people write books about belonging in schools and how important that is, inclusion. So I was a little surprised to see a section on strengthening relationships for emergency preparedness. So what's the connection there? Can you explain a little bit about that strategy?
Absolutely. So I'm going to start big, and then we'll kind of tunnel down into the individual student. So at the most macro level, emergencies require people to respond because emergencies are people-based problems. And so when I call 911, I think a lot of people assume the fire department is going to respond or the police department is going to respond. And yes, albeit those agencies do send a team of people to respond, but it's the actual individual humans who are going to show up on campus. Why am I belaboring this? Because when we show up now, and Mike was talking about the example of on the EMS side, so I'll stick with that, right? The ambulance arrives on campus for that person that was having that chest pain earlier. So they're worried maybe there's some sort of cardiac emergency. The ambulance needs to know where to go, right? They have no idea where room 207 is or where the lunchroom is or where the faculty workroom is or the senior lounge, right? You have a million places on campus. It's huge. And there's no possible way that like, quote unquote, the fire department is going to know how to respond to your specific location in the building unless we've started to establish some relationship, unless they've been there before, unless maybe, and this is a quick hack for establishing a relationship, you send somebody to the front of campus and say, hey, fire department, I'm right here. Here's our relationship, right? Albeit it's quickly formed, but now we can bring them directly into that call. The same is true for our police responders, right? When we have an active shooter threat, when we have a bomb threat, when we have these incidents occur on campus, one of the reasons that schools call us actually is they'll say, we have an active bomb threat. The police department has not given us as much guidance as we wish they would have. And it turns out that sometimes the police department doesn't have the context about the school to know how to make the best decision with or for you. And so there again, they've got to have that context. They have to have the understanding. They have to know what you're doing or else they can't help. Now, again, I don't want anybody to hear that and say like, oh, they're not going to help or they're going to leave me, high and dry. They will respond. They will do all that they possibly can. But sometimes that what they can do is incomplete if we don't have a strong enough relationship, if they don't have the context that they need. On a more individual level, though, I find that one of the biggest concerns that we are experiencing is this concern of weapons being brought to campus, fights occurring on campus, knives occurring on campus, being used in altercation, or guns, of course, at the most extreme level. And when we look at the data of all of the incidents that have happened over the course of the last 60 or so years, we now have that much data. One of the things that is most surprising, depending on how you look at it, is that the vast majority of these events are an escalation of dispute. The vast majority of these events are something happened on Monday, this is a follow-up on Friday, or in more cases than not, it's something happened last year, the follow-up is next year, right? And in those cases, we use a procedure we call a behavioral threat assessment team, or this model of assessing what happened, why is there this threat, why is there this concern, and it turns out that the one superpower that really successful schools have when it comes to behavioral threat assessment teams is relationships. Knowing every single individual child, really understanding the context from which they enter the school day, and truly understanding not just what they're saying, but underneath that, why they're saying it. And being able to use that and organize that to then make the community safer is the greatest superpower that you have as a phenomenal leader of your school. And so I think relationships are the key, whether it's at the most macro level, which is where I talk about the most, by the way, or at the most individual, almost microscopic level, right? At the individual student level, we can make a lot of impact.
Right.
No,
Like
that's very,
we can't have, oh, he was real quiet and kept to himself. Nobody really knew him. Not okay. Like
Yes.
that it's the adult's job to know every kid. Right.
Yes.
Yeah.
And the flip side is that we have, when something happens in the community and someone finds they were living next door to a serial killer, or something, and they say, "Oh, I never knew." Well, we don't live in communities like that anymore where you would know. But a school is a community. And so the flip side of all the scary stuff is the opportunity to build that community when it benefits kids in so many other ways in terms of their social connection, their
Yes.
achievement, right? The more they're connected to their teachers, leaders, and peers, they're going to do better academically. There's so many other reasons. So why not use this as an added opportunity? There's some great exercises where teachers and leaders can put up all the names of the kids and you put dots next to the ones that you have a personal connection to and you see which kids have no dots, and that's something you can change tomorrow, the next day. Spend 2 minutes a day for 5 days just connecting with those kids who have no dots.
I love that exercise. I've used that actually in especially really challenged schools, in really challenging environments, to say, like, we just don't have enough adult student relationships. Where are the connections across our community? And to start to pull back and say, what are we going to do to solve for this? And I love that exercise. I think you called this out. I want to put it, I want to like double click even more. We talk about this from the lens of active shooter prevention, right? That's why people hire me, at least as it relates to behavioral threat assessment. And so it feels like this really, really low frequency and really, really scary event. But what we find when we're doing behavioral threat assessment well is like individual eating disorders, individual students who are coming forward and saying, "I've got a drug concern," students who are experiencing a divorce in the home, students who have just had an adopted child enter the home or depart the home, foster kid enter the home, depart the home. We start to see
Suicide. I imagine
suicide.
suicide. Yeah.
Absolutely. And self-harm kind of ideation. I mean, we see all of those patterns emerge, and we're able to provide so much support and so much care for kids there instead of at the most extreme level. And so I think it almost needs a rebrand, this concept of behavioral threat assessment, because it's not just about that one really, really scary event that I think a lot of us think of automatically. It's actually all of these opportunities that we get to intervene and provide care for.
And I also imagine during an emergency, if you have more relationship with the students, they're going to listen to the leaders, the teachers when they say, "Do this, don't talk, move quietly," all those kinds of things too. Sorry, Mike, you wanted to add something?
No, I wanted to pull on that thread a little bit of threat assessment. Is, where do you feel like people get it wrong, or
Mm.
where are the biggest like ahas from people as you're doing that work? Because I have a couple of them. I went to a thing that the FBI put on in our region about threat assessment, and a
Yeah.
couple of the things really surprised me. So I was curious where your head was at on that.
Yeah, I think there are a few. So the first place where I see people really struggle is when their state goes out and says you need to have a behavioral threat assessment team, and the state often provides an unhelpful amount of guidance. Let's just leave it at that, right? They're like, you need to have it, and then there's like one of two things, right? There's either like one post-it about the information and how to execute, or there's like a million pages, and I'm never going to read that. Like, I do this for a living and I'm not going to read that. And so I think that's one area, right? Like, we just don't have the tools, the strategies, the resources. The second, though, I think, is we over engineer or over index threat assessment for these low frequency events. So if I believe that all the threat assessment is going to do for me is stop active shooters, number one, I'm like wasting a lot of time because I could be doing so much greater work, having such a great impact, relatively speaking. And so I think that can be an area. I think the third, and maybe the space that has the most room, is that schools tend to, in so many things, right? We're really, really focused on them because I, the principal, came in this year. This is my high priority. It's on my 100-day plan or my first semester plan or whatever that is that I entered school with. And then something happens, right? And like, it has nothing to do with safety and security. It's like there was a pipe burst, which I guess that has safety and security implications, but like, or like, our reading scores slipped, right? Something else happens, and all of a sudden the focus gets lost. And so what I see happen with threat assessment is we have sustained bouts for a year or two, or sometimes even three, where our threat assessment model really kind of picks up and we schedule a meeting every 6 weeks and we have the structure and we're detecting things and we're responding. And then we get a little bit, I don't even want to use the word complacent because I actually don't think it's complacent. I think we get fatigued by the volume of other issues that we have to tend to. And as a result of that, then we lose the effort and it can be really hard to restore that down the road. So I think that's probably the place where, again, as I think about the difference between a really strong leader and a learning or developing leader, it's that. And I'll say, look, I'm CEO of my organization. I'm learning this every day. This is not easy, right? How do you sustain the things that are important, recognizing that regularly there is something that is way more urgent that comes up ahead of it? Again, there are experts you could talk to about that. I want to talk to them too. But I do think that as it relates to threat assessment, it's how do you keep it as a high priority item for your entire community?
Right. And I think part of that fatigue of it comes from always thinking about the worst case scenario. Like if we're
Yes.
thinking about threat assessment only in terms of an active shooter, that is exhausting. And no one wants to think about that all the time. And what I tell people, my wife works in a school, and every time there's a school shooting, she's like, we're not safe. And I'm like, you know what? Listen, I'm not trying to be crass, but the likelihood that there will be a school shooting this year is 100%. The likelihood that it happens to you or anyone else you know, infinitesimally small, but still could happen 100%. But to your point, if those are muscles that you're building and exercising on lower stakes things such that
Yes.
you're good at it, then when the big things happen, you're ready to go.
Yeah, we speak the same language. I talk about all the time, right? If your fire alarm goes off, you evacuate well, you take attendance, and you discover it was like popcorn in the faculty microwave, and it was no big deal, right? A lot of people get frustrated by that. I can't believe we interrupted the test day and this and that. I'm like, you just proved to yourself that you have the skills to manage a bigger emergency.
Yep,
You had an unplanned, unprompted, unrehearsed opportunity to practice, and it went well. Celebrate that.
exactly. Yep.
I know Mike's going to try to end this, so I want to ask one more thing. He keeps things short, but Chris, you reminded me when you said, there's a problem when the district sends a million pages, and you
Yes.
you couple that with, I'm a leader, I've got my stress response when something serious is happening, and I'm not really going to access a million pages when there is something going on, even if it's not an active shooter, but it is something serious. So I really like that you sort of simplified things into memorize this list of four things to focus on: physical safety, psychological safety, communication, and leadership. So people can get the details in the book, but it's helpful to know these are four areas. Can you just speak a little bit about these? Okay, something happens, you check your response, your team who's doing what. What is these four areas: physical, psychological, communication, and leadership?
Yeah, I call them the concentric circles of safety because I rerun these over and over and over again as the emergency unfolds. I'll admit I don't know what the gentle word for obsessed with, but I'm obsessed with the idea of like timelines during emergencies
You have
because
standards, Chris. That's what we say.
I have
You're not
standards.
obsessed,
Yes,
you have standards.
I've very rigorous standards for the timelines of emergencies because selfishly, I believe that if you can measure it, then you can control it. And really, what this all gets at is I like control. So anyway, I rerun these sort of four concentric circles or these individual components, at least of them, as the emergency unfolds over and over and over again with different perspective at each point. So at the very beginning of the emergency, fire alarm goes off. Maybe it's popcorn in the microwave. Maybe the building's on fire. I don't know. Physical safety is objective number one. I have to get out of the building. Objective number two is psychological safety. I have kids with me, and so I need to make sure that I do all that I reasonably can to protect their psychological safety, which means I'm not going to like scream at them, get out of the building's on fire, we're all, like some awful thing. But I'm going to say, hey, everybody, let's go outside. Now, of course, could you escalate that if a kid's not listening? We won't get into that now, but the idea is I'm trying to protect secondary to physical, their psychological safety. The third is I need to communicate. So inherent in everything I've done so far is I've really managed that communication piece. I've really kind of navigated that and said over and over again, this is what I need, and I've taken charge. And in that, at this moment, I'm the leader, of the people that I'm around. Technically, the fire alarm is the leader of me, but I'm the leader of the people that are around. And then as we get outside, right, we talked earlier about attendance becomes important. So physical safety, everybody's out, psychological safety. Okay, we're going to start to talk to kids. We're going to say, hey, everybody, this is what happened, provide whatever context we reasonably can, dovetails into communication. But then I'm also going to throw that leadership responsibility to the incident commander, the person who's in charge of the entire response. And then I'll rerun it over the course of time. One of the things I did around this in the book is I actually like gave people, and I think there's a worksheet on this. If not, I'm sorry for being rude. You'll have to get the book, I guess. But maybe, in fact, we'll find a way. Maybe I'll pull these out. We'll put them in the podcast notes. But there's a section that says, like, in the 7 seconds, in the 7 minutes, in the 7 hours that follow the emergency, what are all of the individual stakeholders doing? And it helps to reinforce this idea that if you're on the board versus you're a teacher versus you're a parent, you have a very different amount of understanding for what's going on campus. And the way in which I protect and manage your psychological safety is different. The way in which I assign you leadership or participation, really, really different. The way in which or whether I have any responsibility for your physical safety, right? Very, very different. And so we'll try to pull that out and make that one of the takeaways that people can access in the notes here.
Great. Yeah.
Well,
No, and if people, you reference this, but if people want to learn more, Chris does a great job in the book of describing, what to expect and what you should be doing in the first 7 seconds after the emergency, 7 minutes, 7 hours, 7 weeks, 7 months, and even 7 years. So we won't go into that now, but that is in the book. And I did also want to announce Chris has been generous enough that for subscribers to the Main Idea, he's going to do a workshop on all of this for you on April 7th at 4 p.m. Eastern, 1 p.m. Pacific. So just reach out to me at jen@themainidea.net to learn more about that.
maybe, Jen, why don't you, in the show notes, you want to add
Yeah.
that, and we'll
Yes.
put that out there
Yeah.
too.
We
But
will.
so the book is All Clear: Lessons from a Decade Managing School Crises. Chris Joffe. Chris, this was such a fantastic conversation, man. You're like, now you don't get to talk to many people involved in school safety from an EMS background. So this is pretty neat.
Yeah, this is a great conversation. Thank you for having me. And I know that these are really hard activities to lead. They're really, really hard because they feel so high stakes. And so know that there's a community of people around you, whoever you are, that can support you. You may have to build that. You may have to create it. You may have to call on them, but there are a lot of people that will support you. We are among them.
Perfect way to end it, Chris. Thank you
Thank
so
you.
much. Thank you, Jen.
We appreciate it. And we'll put some info about how to reach out to you in the show notes as well.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the School Leadership Show, a podcast for aspiring and practicing school leaders. Send your comments, questions, and show ideas to me, Mike, at schoolleadershipshow.com. And please consider rating the podcast in iTunes and leaving a comment. And definitely pass the show along to your colleagues.